Welcome back to the Collectability Podcast. It is a great honor to welcome Nick Foulkes to the Collectability Podcast. We know him as a horological expert covering all aspects of the industry, but particularly Patek Philippe, where he has been a contributor and special horological correspondent of the Patek Philippe Magazine for over 20 years. He has written the official authorized biography on Patek Philippe and countless words that have educated and informed the world about all things Patek Philippe. But his interest and extensive knowledge spread far beyond the hallowed walls of watchmaking. As a historian, writer, journalist, and tastemaker, Nick Foulkes is an internationally recognized authority on culture, art, and the luxury lifestyle. He has authored approximately 30 books, including his critically acclaimed trilogy of 19th century histories. He contributes to a wide range of newspapers and magazines around the world. He is a contributing editor to the FT's How to Spend It magazine, a contributing editor to Vanity Fair, a columnist for Country Life and Luxury, editor of British GQ. He launched and continues to edit Vanity Fair's twice yearly watch magazine On Time, and he also launched and continues to edit Vanity Fair on Art. In 2007, he was named Havana Man of the Year by the Cuban government, having been nominated for this award on 4 previous occasions. He is regularly acknowledged on international best dressed lists, including the most prestigious Vanity Fair Best Dressed list in 2011, and his distinctive, elegant style is eagerly observed globally. In 2021, and this is the topic everyone's talking about today, he was appointed president of the jury for the foundation of the GPHG, the Grand Prix de Horlogerie de Genève. He lives in London with his wife and 2 sons, Max and Freddie, who feature in his most recent accomplishment as a social media sensation with Foulkes and Sons. And we'll dig into that shortly. First of all, welcome, Nick. How are you today?
John, it's lovely to be with you virtually, and thanks to the marvels of the modern world, you can question me about all sorts of nonsense, and I can give you kind of evasive answers for the next hour or so.
I think this will be a meandering conversation neither of us will soon forget.
Well, you're very kind. You're very kind.
So first, let's start with a gift that you gave the world, and particularly me, and that is your new video series, Foulkes and Sons. You literally helped me survive quarantine. I don't smoke cigars. I don't know anything about cigars until I watched this series of videos that you and your sons have done. Can you tell us about that? How did it get started, and what's the future?
What was interesting was I just returned from Havana when the lockdown started, and my older son works in Davidoff. I thought, well, why don't we taste some cigars? And I'd never really done any of this stuff. So we propped a camera up against a sort of book and press record, and then went and made it and stuck it on Instagram first. And then we put it on YouTube now. And it's just a bit of sort of light-hearted nonsense, really. There is some sort of knowledge in there if you look hard enough around the corners and back behind things. But it's more hoping to share our enthusiasm and the pleasure we take in these things. And this is as true of watches, true of cigars, true of tailoring. The internet has made instant experts of us all. And there is so much just statistical information about these things that everything becomes like an examination, like a school exam. These things are pleasures, and we're lucky enough to be able to enjoy them. And it's about taking pleasure in these things, hopefully communicating that pleasure to others. And it's great as a father, it's marvelous to spend time with your children. And it's even more marvelous that they actually still want to spend time with me. There's nothing else like it out there. And there may be a very, very good reason for that. But I mean, Maxim has always been trying to do what others aren't doing, because nobody can then tell you how badly you're doing it because there's nothing to compare it with.
That's brilliant. In late 2020, the Financial Times wrote an article and stated how Foulkes and Sons has become the Kardashians of cigars. How do you feel about that comparison?
Well, I think I might have made that comparison myself. I sort of pity the Kardashians, really. I mean, they have sunk so low as to be compared with me. It's fun, would that we enjoyed that global reach of the Kardashians. I mean, there's probably 150,000 people who've seen the most popular video for some reason. Maybe it's one person watching it 150,000 times. I don't know.
I just sense there's a reality show in your future. And
well, that would be very nice, but somebody's got to want that. And I mean, also the thing is, it's kind of escapist reality, really. So it's kind of an unreality show or a surreality show or something like that.
For any of our listeners in the world of media, this is an opportunity of a lifetime.
I couldn't agree with you more.
But you're an enthusiastic contributor to social media, and you really embrace this method of communication. As you're an academic, I find your embrace of this new media very interesting. What appeals to you using social media to connect to people?
Well, I think a lot of it is, obviously it's been built by people who are frightfully clever. So they will make it addictive, like I presume Coca-Cola is addictive. They put something in there that makes you want more than one. So, I mean, I fell into the trap that everybody falls into with these things, that you sort of get it becomes a part of your life, and then you're constantly I've got to watch myself because I look at it too much. I started it probably about, 6 years ago or something like that, when I was trying to promote a book I wrote about a French painter called Bernard Buffet. And it just went from there. People seem to like it. I mean, I read the other day on the Christie's website, it's supposed to be quite influential in watches and things like this. And then I think it's now become a bit like having a telephone or electricity in your house. Do you know what I mean? That if one is expected to do it. And the media changes so profoundly. Had you said to me when I started writing that, one day I'm going to be putting pictures taken on my telephone onto something that doesn't exist called the internet, that you can't see or touch, but people will be responding to it in their tens of thousands or whatever it is, I would have thought, what the hell's going on here? And yet that's exactly what's happened. I am speaking as your sort of visitor from the Middle Ages on this one. Do you know what I mean? It's like kind of witchcraft for me.
But the way that you connect with your audience, I think we have to give credit to your sons too. And I'd like to talk about Max, who is a certified master of Havana cigars, and Freddie, who I understand is a graduate of film school. How do they influence you and your work with these videos? And what's it like working with your sons?
Well, it's wonderful working with my sons. I feel very flattered that they are prepared to do it. And I started it really as something to do during lockdown, not really envisaging any future for it. It was just something to literally fill those sudden acres of time that opened up. It's just a joy. Freddie is a graduate, actually, of the Courtauld Institute, which is an art history college in England. He's just graduated from that, and we're very proud of him. Max, this great master of Havanas, works in the cigar shop Davidoff in London. He also writes for this cigar startup website called Cigar Keep. And Freddie has, from being quite reluctant and just limiting his activity to pressing the button on the camera and then running out of the room, now actually takes, I think, some sort of pleasure and a considerable pride in producing little films that have still that kind of homemade quality to them, that authenticity, but that are slightly more humorous in their execution, or there's something to them. There's something beyond merely the recording and reproducing of information.
Well, Collectability fully recommends watching your video series.
You're very, very kind, John. And when you're over, we must get you on the show.
That'd be fun. You could have John's first cigar and see how that goes.
Why not? See if you, it would be brilliant.
I'll be coughing up a lung, but
no, you won't be.
As long as we have a Patek Philippe lighter for the cigars.
If you could bring it with you, we could then showcase that, because those are amazing things. Those. Do you remember we kind of invented those?
That's true. I remember sitting there at Le Reserve and we had some Patek Philippe lighters.
You were very eagle-eyed in identifying. And I mean, I just love that period of Patek from the 70s when they were doing really amazing stuff, because they worked with Georges L'Enfant, that great Parisian goldsmith, on the astrological pendants.
Yes.
And the quality of the make, even the sort of the hasp where you put the chain through, it revolves on its own axis at the top. It doesn't sort of move around. I mean, they're brilliantly made, but we digress.
We're going to talk about ellipse very soon. This is something I think near and dear to our hearts. And I credit you for really igniting the global understanding of the importance of the ellipse in Patek Philippe's history. But
You're kind. Thank you.
We're going to get back to that soon, because first, and this dovetails with that topic, I'd like to talk about fashion, in particular clothes. You are regularly on best dressed lists including definitive list of dandies. Do you accept that description?
I mean, I read one of my earlier books was a biography of Count d'Orsay called Last of the Dandies, because after Beau Brummel, he was the last great dandy in the sense that it's about more than wearing clothes. It's the life of an aesthete. It's acting within certain codes and rules, but pushing them slightly to extremes. It's quite subtle. I mean, I'll take it because it's a nice thing to be, but there's more to it than just sort of wearing a few vigorous pieces of clothing. It's about microscopic detail, and it's understanding the impact of that detail, and it's understanding that detail is not just detail for the sake of detail. It is contributing to an overall effect that other people may not be able to identify the component parts thereof, but you understand the importance of a shade of color, or not matching your pocket handkerchief to your tie or shirt, but matching it to your socks, or things like this. I mean, it disturbs me, for example, if I am wearing brown shoes and I have got a watch that is on a black strap. I mean, that actually would be almost enough to ruin my day, or I'd be kind of conscious about it.
That brings up an interesting question I have for you. I recently listened to a podcast with Bryn Wallner, famously at Dime Piece on Instagram. And she said, because she's in her early 20s, and she was talking about pop culture, how the influence of Harry Styles and other artists, she didn't use the word dandy, but dressing in clothes that are a bit more ambiguous. For example, she talks about a man wearing a blouse. Yeah, and how like Harry Styles has this look, and other young men are trying to emulate that. Now, last night I took my 16-year-old daughter to a concert here in New York, and I saw a lot of men, they're boys, I would say aged like 16 in their 20s, dressed in blouses, which is something I've never seen going out before. And what Bryn said in the podcast is, she's like, you have these guys wearing blouses, but then the most masculine possible wristwatch, like a Rolex Daytona or a Submariner or even a Panerai. The look just doesn't work, in her opinion. In my opinion, I agree. But I think this, we'll call it, I don't know, the new dandy is trying to figure things out right now. And it hasn't crossed over the look to their wrist to what jewelry, what watches, what accessories they're wearing. They just want to have the clothes, and the watches are a complete mismatch at this point.
I think there's a difference between people who are actual dandies and people who are following fashion. I mean, putting on a bit of eyeliner and wearing a sort of androgynous clothing comes and goes. I mean, the last time would have been, I suppose, in the 1980s in England, when you have the new romantic movement and, puffy sleeves, fencing shirts, all this kind of thing. I mean, I had Turnbull and Asser make me what you might call a pie crust collar blouse. It's a collarless shirt, but it's actually based upon one that was worn by Warren Beatty in the 1970s. So it's frill fronted. There's this dress code where you have now velvet jacket and open neck shirt. It's a sort of relaxed country house type thing that's not quite dressing for dinner, but it is dressing for dinner. So you change what you're wearing, but you don't wear a bow tie with it. So I had this thing made which has got a frilly front, frilly collar, gathered cuffs, and you could call it a blouse, but I would also call it something from the 1960s, when you had people like Patrick Litchfield, the Earl of Litchfield, wearing this kind of stuff. I mean, who were definitely very masculine men, and yet they were wearing frills and bows and all this kind of thing that was more of a sort of 17th, 18th century kind of look, rather than an androgynous gender fluid look. I think that what we're seeing today is probably more akin to Bowie of the first half of the 70s, that kind of thing.
It just makes me wonder if watch brands are going to follow this trend.
I think the resurgence of thin watches, the rise of art watches. I mean, look at strange things like the King Midas, for example. I mean, that's a watch I really like. For years, I couldn't understand why, when you've got a standout design, a numbered series from Rolex, which you just don't have. You've got maybe, I think, 2 numbered series. I think you've got that, and you've got the the Texas one, the gold oyster quartz day date. And, I think that people are moving towards those sort of vintage things with Milanais, Polonais bracelets with different interpretations. I obviously, as you know, and we were discussing only a couple of weeks ago, the heat has gone out of the steel sports watch market. People are still paying multiples over retail. I think it was inevitable and also probably quite desirable that this insane speculation was reined in to a degree. I had 20 years free reign collecting vintage Cartier because nobody was interested in it at all. And now suddenly there's this explosion of interest. And even the most banal watches that I would have passed up 5-6 years ago are now becoming desirable. And so I think that there is a move towards this sort of timekeeping. The string of pearls for men is a thing I've noticed. And I just can't get on with that. I'm too old. I've got a lot of neck jewelry. Don't get me wrong. What have I got? I've got this sort of ancient Mayan thing that was done by Bulgari in the 50s. I've got some more here. I got a Van Cleef and Arpels astrological pendant and something from Grima. So I go for that. But I'm not saying I wouldn't wear pearls. But I'm saying I wouldn't wear pearls.
I don't think I've yet worn pearls.
King James I was the man who, I think he was king. It was King James I of England, James VI of Scotland. There was this very kind of gender fluid culture, shall we say, in his court. It's
shocking. For the first time in my life, and I'd say weekly, I get an inquiry of someone asking, do you have any Patek Philippe ultra-thin mesh bracelet watches in stock? This is something unheard of, where I'm seeing a demand growing in a market segment where you could still buy great examples for under $10,000. And we're in a very unique intersection of time. The way I see the market from a helicopter view is some of these hyper-masculine watches that are easily identifiable 20 feet away are going to start being less desirable. And people are going to be looking for things a little discreet, maybe fewer millimeters here and there. And a new look might be desirable, at least for the fashionable collectors.
I think you're right. I think also what you're identifying very correctly is the immense value they give. The only problem is, of course, if like me, you've got a reasonably smallish wrist, you basically, if you take the decision to chop the bracelet, you render it almost unsaleable, or you narrow the resale market considerably because you have to look to somebody who's either got your size or smaller wrist. I've been buying those things for more than a couple of years, as you know, because I really like them. And there's one that I got onto recently with the Godrons in it. It is the Patek Philippe reference 3733. I've got the one with the onyx dial on the Godron bracelet. It's a great watch. It would go perfectly with that look you were describing earlier, but then also it looks like it's a kind of its own sort of like Harold Robbins novel of a watch. You know what I mean? It speaks to me of that sort of go-go 70s disco era, Adnan Khashoggi, Rolls-Royce Camargue, all that kind of stuff.
Well, next time I see you, I might be wearing a blouse, string of pearls.
Yeah. I'll bring some eyeliner and we can really make an evening of it.
Ultra-thin mesh bracelet watch. That will be an evening. Yes, with the Patek Philippe lighter.
With the Patek lighter, yes.
Have you always been interested in fine clothes? Has this been something part of your life from a young age?
Yeah, I've loved clothes for as long as I can. Literally for as long as I can remember. And my grandfather was quite a snappy dresser as well.
It's been said that you found in 1972 a silver and onyx ring in a park. And this is what started everything if you're interested in jewelry. Is that true?
It is true. Where did you dig that up?
FT.
Must be true in that case. No, it's entirely true. And I'm still sort of suffering the effects of that now. I'm now holding up for the benefit of the camera 2 hands with 9 rings on them. So it hasn't really gone away. The child is father to the man, I believe. I'm paraphrasing Wordsworth.
I think you just answered my next question is what's the most amount of rings that you can wear at the same time?
The most amount of rings, I wear 9 at the moment, and I would probably make it up to 10.
That's impressive.
And then I'd be disappointed, yeah.
let's talk about tweed.
Yeah.
What makes a beautiful tweed, and where do you recommend a gentleman or a man or a woman to find the best tweed suit?
I've designed a few tweeds. I designed my first tweed in 1994 or something like this. We had it made in Scotland. It was with Country Life. It was quite successful. I just love that fabric. I love color. It's also practical. I don't know. I mean, it's also old fashioned, which I like. It's like having one of these high performance fabrics today, but from like 150 years ago. Where can one go? Well, there used to be a place called W. Bill, which was a sort of cellar underneath Savile Row where they had lengths of cloth left over from the 30s. And I used to spend a lot of time down there just picking out the loudest checks that I could find. And it was like something out of one of those dystopian movies where people all live underground. You know what I mean? There was there were people there who went underground, and in the winter they wouldn't see daylight because they would be going in the dark in the morning and coming out after dark in the evening. It was great. It's gone quite mainstream now, tweed, for some years now, but I still love it. Any opportunity I can have to wear tweed, I will, you know.
So you could have your own reality show on cigars and fashion. And now I'm going to segue talking about you as a historian and an author. You could have multiple shows. But
yes, multiple shows, multiple channels.
It is so incredible that you are the first person to be interviewed on the Collectability podcast that has their own Wikipedia page. I want to say congratulations for that.
Well, thank you very much. I must look at it and see how inaccurate it is.
Well, we all know Wikipedia is the arbiter of all facts, and I learned something about you reading Wikipedia, and that your book, Swans, Legends of Jet Society, was optioned for a TV series. Is this true?
Yes, it is. I mean, I have to say Wikipedia is one of the better things about the internet because, of course, it is not always accurate, but it gives a good go, and it has shaped our modern world, not entirely for the better, because we now outsource the things we used to remember. There's no need to remember poetry anymore because you can just, get it up on the telephone in a minute. But that's true. It was optioned. And I believe there are indeed offers from three production companies at the moment on that.
Oh, can you tell us about that book?
It was a book about the jet set, really this sort of period before international travel became commonplace. So really from the early 50s to the early 70s. It's a very small period, but it's a period of change. I tend to believe that the jet aircraft was as much of a defining factor of the second half of the 20th century as, say, television or the contraceptive pill or things like that. I think it was huge. And this period was just this amazing excitement about discovering the world. And you had the same people just popping up all over the place. I mean, you know them: Gloria Guinness, Babe Paley, Agnelli, Jacqueline de Reeb, all these people. I like these periods of history that are turning points where things are different before and after. But there's this kind of hinge where things change, and you've got a bit of the old world, you've got a bit of this sort of residual respect for the nobility and all this kind of thing. And you've got the new world of sort of high-speed travel, and then you get sort of into hippies. And so you've got this very, very substantial change taking place in a relatively short period of time. I'm a sucker for glamour, and the characters were huge characters. They lived, to my eyes at least, with a degree of taste and refinement and understanding of what they were about, when you compare them to today's super rich, who are much richer than these people ever were, but who many times seem to lack the appreciation of the better things in life, And I mean, I don't mean that in just the sort of conventional sense of sitting back and drinking the most expensive cognac you can find or whatever, but actually understanding what it is you're dealing with. I mean, that's not entirely true of everybody, but I think that everything is about shortcuts or hacks or whatever. So everything is about signaling, and it's about, I mean, you saw it with the Nautilus. For years, it was a kind of secret thing that sort of, jewelers couldn't really shift them very easily. But people like you and me kind of loved them because they were eccentric. And then suddenly they became a thing and it's all over the place and it's all gone. I mean, I rather like that the Nautilus was a great jet set watch. It was Patek Philippe entering the modern age, you know.
You commented on glamour. I have no doubt, well, it's fact because you just mentioned so many names of some of the glamorous people you've met from all walks of life and society. Are there some that just you'll never forget meeting them in person, interviewing them? Can you share some stories of some amazing meetings you've had?
Well, there was a very funny one I had with Pierre Cardin once. I was doing a book about costume balls, and he had worked on Dali's costume for the Bastigi ball. And we were talking about this, and I think he'd done some work with Dior as well. And basically, we had this great discussion, and he was very forthcoming. And then we were looking around the office, and I saw what looked like a scrunched up ball of aluminium foil on a shelf. So I looked at that, and I said, Mr. Cardin, one thing before we go, what's that up there? And he said, it's a chocolate Sputnik. And I said, how unusual. And he said, yes, I got the Master Chocolatier Prize of France that year, whatever. I mean, whenever this was 69 or 72, whenever Sputnik, I don't know. Anyway. And then he said under his breath, and Chanel never got it. So I love this idea that so that he was still in competition with Chanel. I mean, there he was, Pierre Cardin, like, I don't know, in his 90s, talking about a chocolate Sputnik. And he was still kind of really pleased that he'd pulled one over on Chanel by kind of, she didn't get the kind of Master Chocolatier prize that year. There was another one I did with Otto von Habsburg, the man who would be the Emperor of Austria-Hungary and by extension, the kind of chief of the Holy Roman Empire today, were such a thing in existence. I met him one afternoon in Marbella after I'd met Rod Stewart in the morning, which was quite interesting. So I bumped into Otto. He'd been for his honeymoon. He was coming back 50 years later or something. And we sat and we were chatting. And I asked him that very same question you've just asked me. And I said, were there people that you were interested to meet and were there people that you like to keep out of the way of and didn't think much of? And he said, give it some thought. And he said, yeah, always try to keep out of Hitler's way. I mean, because for him, this was like somebody he would have had to kind of deal with on a sort of, not a social level, but it would sort of, because Hitler would have obviously capitalized on the fact that he would have been meeting with the man who would be the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. And obviously Otto wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. You know, yet in the Germanophone world at the time, he would have been in Berlin. I find those things fascinating. And I mean, I've been fortunate enough to get to know many people who are, alas, no longer with us. I mean, the great Mark Burley, the man who founded Annabelle's in the 60s, and his son, I believe, is opening a club in New York quite soon. And my favorite Mark Burley story is he was he was the man who lived life at a real pitch of elegance that is breathtaking. We used to have backgammon tournaments at his house in London. We were discussing once how to set it up, and he just had a new backgammon set made by Hermes incorporating a tapestry playing surface. He said, listen, and he rolled the dice on the board, and he said, what do you hear? And I said, well, I don't hear anything, Mr. Burley. And he said, exactly. You're not disturbed by the noise of the dice. And this is the level at which he lived, was that the noise of dice falling on a hard surface would be somehow kind of too much of the real world intruding into his life. And I once rang him up. This was sort of, I don't know, many years into our friendship. And his housekeeper answered the phone. And I said, oh, is Mark there and can I have a word? And she sort of went off and came back and said, no, I'm afraid Mr. Burley can't come to the phone right now. He's busy relaxing.
Time is the ultimate luxury. It
is. And he was certainly not going to waste it. He was brilliant, Mark. I mean, I have been very fortunate in being able to meet some really exceptional people. I mean, among them, obviously, Philippe Stern, the architect of modern Patek, and in the watch industry, some great people. I mean, Gino Macaluso, alas, no longer with us. Alain Perrin still with us, the father of modern luxury. Gunter Blumlein. All these people, who made so much of a difference. And it saddens me that other people will not have that sort of enriching moment of actually meeting these people who have in their worlds made change. I mean, I'm not saying they've sort of cured cancer or give us world peace, but they are people who made a difference in the kind of lives that we lead. I mean, you and I, we're talking about, on the podcast that accompanies your business, where you sell items of immense value and limited practical use, and yet of great desirability.
This is a good segue from discussing cultural royalty and moving towards watchmaking royalty. And Philippe Stern is topic number one. Can you remember one of the first times you might have met him and share some stories of your relationship, your long relationship with the Stern family?
Well, I mean, I first went to Patek when it was still on the Rue de Rhône. I think it was 1992. And the museum was that waiting room. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I mean, it was like you went in, there was a table and there was a couple of kind of cabinets with some sort of typewritten cards, which basically said old watch circa old watch circa 1900. It's got a bit more, how shall we say, rigorous since then. And you still had the smell of Borkum Riff, from Henri Stern's pipe. I met Philippe probably mid-90s. I think actually it was at Plan-les-Ouates before Plan-les-Ouates actually fully opened. He's a fascinating man. Anybody in the world of Patek knows that, you better than many. But what he did was he made the right decision again and again and again and again and again. But he made it 10 years before everybody else. I mean, the Caliber 89, Max Studer went to see him in his office in 1979 and 1980 and said, look, we got this big anniversary coming up. My idea is, and bearing in mind the time in 1980, it's LCD displays, it's quartz, it's the future, it's modernity, it's Sony Walkmans. It's not what Max Studer suggested, which was we're going to make the most complicated portable mechanical timekeeping device ever known to history. It'll make the Graves look like a kind of poor second in terms of achievement. Instead of thinking he was mad and kicking him out of his office, Philippe Stern said, yeah, we'll do that. We're going to kind of make what was in effect a 19th century watch for the late 20th century. You would not get an employee-run company. You would only get this in an owner-managed company, that they would be prepared to set aside a kind of crack team of watchmakers, Monsieur Bouclin, all these people, and to come up with a watch that incorporated the prediction of the date of Easter, which is still, I think, my favorite complication, is exceptional. Not only that, I mean, this decision to stick making mechanical watches. I mean, the Caliber 240, one of my favorite movements ever, devised by Mr. Gérard Beret, formerly of Montre Universal. I mean, the story goes, it took him 6 months to make this Caliber, and that was 1977. And the Caliber is still in use today, and it's still beautiful, and it's designed to be viewed through an exhibition back, because you've got the planetary rotor countersunk into the movement, so you can see all that beautiful finishing. And who was doing that in 1977? Nobody. Rolex was investing in mechanical movements again, but those were the two companies. And it's no coincidence that these companies are independent and effectively owner managed. I mean, although Rolex is a charitable trust, I mean, these people, him, and then it was Heinegger at the time in Rolex, men of incredible vision and great bravery to think that the world is going one way and we're going to go this way. So, I mean, it's hard not to respect him. Again, with Plan-les-Ouates, I mean, I remember when they announced it and I was researching the book, there was a transcript of the speech he gave to the workforce saying that sort of, we're going to gather you all up and put you over here. And you had to say it's near the Renault garage on the way out of town, because, of course, nobody knew where Plan-les-Ouates was. And now it's Plan-les-Watch. And, there's a big sort of rush hour traffic jam every time anyone wants to leave at the end of the day. Every company's out there. So, I mean, he just took these decisions again and again and again. Always the right decision, always way ahead of everybody else. The museum is amazing. It's a world-class collection. Anybody who's interested in not just watches, but in terms of human creativity, cultural history. I mean, there's a whole centuries of pieces there that speak of the world of timekeeping well before Patek Philippe was even founded. That is something that, yes, has helped Patek Philippe, but also it's a great gift to humanity, really, when you think about it, that you have somebody who has made this space and this collection available to be enjoyed by the public.
And Philippe Stern did it on his own. I mean, it was his vision and his audacity and his action.
I mean, it really was. I mean, and also what's interesting is he gave Madame Raw he kept, I mean, there was this sort of slight genetic thing almost, because he was sort of being very counterintuitive and keeping Madame Raw busy when on enameling and things like that. So the family has been lucky, and is lucky with Thierry, to have inspired family management rather than just kind of passive ownership and employee management. And I think you see the difference. I mean, you see it in that decision to halt steel Nautilus production for a while. That was a brilliant decision because, of course, any manager on a kind of KPI-related bonus scheme would be saying, yeah, well, let's pull out of making plain gold watches and we'll go all into sort of steel sports. And he said, no, I want this company to be around and to be more than a kind of one-trick pony when my kids are running it. So we're going to have to take a bit of a breather on this one. And I salute that.
I've never seen any other company that thinks intergenerationally. And that decision about the Nautilus, in retrospect, was brilliant. And I'm glad you said that.
What was interesting was that what Thierry did when he did the green one and then he did the Tiffany one was say, you want to see how colored dials are really done on a steel sports watch? This is how they're really done. The world went nuts. It's almost like theological debate in ancient Constantinople. Do you know what I mean? Where they would almost have riots over kind of very fine doctrinal differences. Something that sort of, there'll be people saying that Tiffany is a brilliant thing. There'll be others saying it's a terrible thing. And there'll be speculators. It's 180 watches. And yet, it takes on this kind of life-altering significance for people. And I mean, at the end of the day, these are mechanical objects with which people have a profoundly personal relationship. And I think that that's the magic, really, of Patek, is that they are valuable because we assign a value to them. We collectively, you and I, know that to be a fact.
It infects your soul.
I think it was Jean Cocteau who said that an artist has succeeded when you see the world through his eyes after seeing his work. With Patek, it is a lens through which to view many things. I have learned a great deal just by looking at Patek, at studying it, and not just about watches, but about culture. The Oak collection, for example, a fascinating exercise on so many levels. Great Patek collection. And you have there a passionate collector who put quite remarkable resources at the disposal of his great passion in life. This is Nick Foulkes. You're listening to my interview on the Collectability podcast with John Reardon.
And I was going to ask you about that later, but let's dive into the Oak collection now. You are the curator of the collection.
I helped put it together for the museum, yeah.
The Oak collection, for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's can we say his name? It's public now.
I don't know whether we can or not, so okay. Better not.
So Google if you'd like to see his name.
Look it up on the internet and you'll find his name.
This is a quick description. The modern day Henry Graves, and he's been collecting for decades some of the most impressive watches the world has ever seen. Many of them were sold and he bought through auction, but he also bought many privately and directly from Patek Philippe. This collection went on view this past May at the Design Museum in London. And I'll never forget the night, the opening act. That's the last time I saw you, Nick. It was the who's who of the watch world was at the museum and all there to celebrate his collecting, his watches. And they were the most elegantly and beautifully presented. And I hope there's going to be another stop on the tour soon. Is there anything you could share?
We're talking about America and somewhere in the Middle East. And I think it's no secret that New York wouldn't be a bad place to exhibit this collection. I mean, when we were initially discussing it, he wasn't sure that he wanted to do something on a sort of smaller scale and on a more intimate scale. And I sort of said, well, why not at least consider doing it in a cultural institution? Because you are exhibiting objects of human ingenuity and great beauty and artistic merit. They have exhibitions of ceramics. They have exhibitions of all sorts of things. Brands do exhibitions that are inevitably going to be commercial or semi-commercial, but this was basically a private collector showing his collection in a cultural institution. And I think that for watches, that's the first time it's been done. I was speaking to Tim Marlowe, the director of the Design Museum, the other day about this, and it wasn't on for very long, but there were school kids going in. There were probably 1,200 visitors a day or something. There was an appetite and interest, and not in the way that you see necessarily crowds gathering outside a vintage watch shop to look in the window, which, is now a phenomenon. You've got guys who basically just sort of sit there and just sort of look at the window in a sort of stupor for about 2 or 3 minutes. This was people who were engaging with these objects on a cultural level and what they said. And I mean, what impressed me, for example, is that it's a very good collection of Calatravas. Probably the best in the world, although I only say probably because I haven't seen every other Calatrava collection. But there is depth, there is breadth, and there is just insane things, like he's asked and Patek agreed to remake watches from the 40s. So he's got the original from the 40s, and then he's got the remake from the 20 teens. It's a bit like asking Picasso to repaint something that he painted 50, 60 years earlier. And you'd say, could you do me the same? And he'd say no. But actually, the opportunity to see the Patek, if you call him the Picasso or the whatever you want, but you've got basically the same sensibilities on the same subject, but separated by 3/4 of a century almost. And I mean, what was nice was that people were responding to that, and of course to the métier d'art, or the decorative craft pieces. But there was a real openness to the importance of watchmaking and an appetite and a hunger for what was on show. And I mean, that was really rewarding. I mean, yes, it was a demanding thing to do because it was the first time it had been done. I tried to make a kind of story that you could follow with the thing, but the collector obviously was also keen to put as much in. So it was very much a collaborative process. And I mean, I think he was justifiably very, very proud of what he'd achieved.
And he deserves to be very proud. It's exceptional. And I hope it does go on tour around the world.
This was opening the world of watches to a broader, yes, a cultured public, yes, a curious public, but opening it to a public who are more used to seeing paintings or even cars exhibited in a museum, or objects of design or sculpture or whatever. And it's placing watches in that cultural context that I think is very important.
You bring up such a great point. If you go to the Patek Philippe Museum, odds are you've already had the Kool-Aid and you know what you want to see.
Yeah. I mean, you're making a pilgrimage.
And it's the same if you go to one of the grand exhibitions the Patek Philippe's had around the world.
Yeah.
But to go to a museum, it's a different mindset that you walk through those doors and look through the glass at the watch. It's not about money. It's not about value. It's about something more.
It's about cultural value.
Yes.
It's about what it is to be human, because on all aspects, it brings together so many different human activities. And this is the work of people, like a work of art. A work of art, I'm looking at a painting in front of me by Bernard Buffet, about whom I wrote a book. I see the traces made by his hand. I mean, he committed suicide in 1999, and yet I have something that he created with his hand, and it's still speaking to me on an emotional level almost a quarter of a century after his death. And I think that it's about establishing a real connection with an object and the people who made it.
That's the beauty of what you're doing and what the collector behind the Oak collection has done. So congratulations to all involved in that. And we anxiously await to see what happens next.
It would be good if it did make it over to America, I have to say.
There's a few places that could be quite interesting to display.
I know. I mean, America is such a vast nation. I mean, I was having this discussion with Jean-Claude Bivet on a panel about a year ago, and everyone was going, oh, what are the emerging markets? And I said, well, hang on a second. You've got not an emerging market, but you've got a market that is still, there's much to be done in it, as you well know. In the United States, you've got some of the richest people in the world, some of the most discriminating, educated people in the world. And yet you've also got people who are still to sort of join that amazing journey of watch collecting. And I mean, I think that sort of executives sometimes tend to overlook that in pursuing the low-hanging fruit of sort of Far Eastern markets.
I agree with you fully. The brands don't quite understand. Some understand it better than others. The US is so segmented. I look at the traditional family jeweler is in many smaller towns, and they're still important towns. They'll have a circle of affluence that shop with them for generations. They were introduced to brands Rolex and then Patek Philippe, and in many cases, they still have those brands available for sale. but these are the buyers that are going there aren't necessarily thinking Geneva or thinking social media. They're literally thinking about the salesperson in front of them that's been selling their family for generations.
Which is great, and which is what I love. I'm fortunate enough to speak to Lord Hindlip, who was a former chairman of Christie's, and he and Richardson, John Richardson, the Picasso biographer, started Christie's in New York in the 60s, when you could go up and down Fifth Avenue and still come across, 6 Van Goghs and put them in the sale. I mean, it's no coincidence that Graves and Packard were both Americans and are both accepted as the emblematic watch collectors of the pre-quartz world. And also your friend in was it Rockford, the Time Museum, or was it called Rockford?
Yes, Seth Atwood from the Rockford Time Museum,
who commissioned the Patek Philippe secular calendar pocket watch that was made by Victorin Piguet, I think. There's a great story in the book about how there's supposed to be 2 of these, the one that was taken by Atwood and the one that's in the Patek Museum. There's actually a third one because one got lost in the post between the Valais and Geneva. So either in the back of some mailman's sack from sort of 50 years ago, there is this sort of amazing watch. And I just love that kind of humanity where you lose something in the post that is now a treasure of incalculable value, especially now that pocket watches are making a return to favor.
Love to see that watch resurface. But then there's the question of who owns it. It's a bit sensitive.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's probably why it's not resurfacing.
Now, you have had unprecedented access to the Patek Philippe archives and even more importantly, the people, the decision makers that have made the brand in the last decades. And with that there's such a weight of responsibility because that every word that you write for the magazine, every word that you wrote in the authorized biography is going to be read by the Stearns. What was the experience like having that weight on your shoulders and how do you deal with that moving forward?
I mean, the weight is really one of hoping that my work does justice to what they've achieved. And my aim is to convey the personal enthusiasm that I feel, but also try and convey what it is that makes their work unique and special and what makes them unique and special. I mean, I agonize over some of those magazine pieces because we're trying to kind of explain quite abstract things at times. I found one about polishing the bracelets on the Nautilus, which was, for some reason, quite tricky to kind of finish because you're describing a process, but it is much more than a process. It's almost a sort of liturgical activity. It's conveying what for them is an almost instinctive process, trying to kind of put that into words that will convey what it is that they do just intuitively. I don't think necessarily of the Stearns liking it or disliking it. I'm grateful if they do, and if they don't, they can change it because, it's official, it's authorized, it's with their consent, and happily they didn't change anything. I mean, the story about the cigarettes and all that, which had to come back in because I wanted them back in. They were very good about that. And it was very flattering to have that, first of all, that degree of trust, but then also that degree of them not needing to change anything too much. I think Philippe made one remark at the beginning that I didn't get into Patek quickly enough and spoke a bit too much about the others. So I took a chunk of the first chapter back and just kept it really focused on the Polish origins. I mean, it was hard work, but they were wonderful patrons.
And it's interesting because you are not only Patek Philippe, you're not only watches, you have such diverse interests and understanding that when you do dive deep into one brand like you have, you offer insight that I think other writers don't have.
You were very, very kind to say so, John.
But you could see it, you could read it in the authorized biography. It's there's a lot of surprising stories that you tell for the first time within those pages. What was your favorite chapter and era in that book that really comes to mind?
It's very difficult because there are some companies that have definite periods when they're top of the pops and then other periods when they're asleep, and that's easy. Patek has always had something going on, good or bad. There's always been drama, jeopardy, success. I mean, it's a roller coaster. I probably found the recent modern history. So, I mean, I'm talking about maybe the mid 20th century, where you see the Stern family take over. I mean, you know this because you did that marvelous book about Patek in America, the American adventure. I mean, and then Patek's diary of his sort of almost comedically ill-starred first trip to America after the Great Exhibition in London in the 1850s. He almost drowns when his boat hits sort of bad weather. A row of houses blow up and burn down next to his hotel in New York. He gets robbed when he's down having breakfast. His bags are rifled. The train gets derailed. He gets stuck in a snowdrift. He is on the Mississippi, and the two boats are having a race, and one of them runs aground. And that is a kind of TV miniseries right there. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's so personal. And what he was quite upset about during his trip to New York was the price of the cigars.
Oh, yes, he was very upset about it. I mean, there's the price. I mean, he finds New York the most sort of, it's the New York of the gangs of New York.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And you get the sense of this sort of Swiss guy who sort of, he was a bit of a young hothead and a kind of a revolutionary and all that. But, you know, he's settled down and he's running a successful business. And then suddenly he's in the wild, wild West. You've got a lot of Europeans who visit America at that time, and they've got no idea what they've landed in. I mean, it was what, you know, Beijing and Shanghai were in the teens of this century. Do you know what I mean? It was just a sort of rapidly, hugely powerful infant nation, just sort of with immense potential. And I mean, there's that where he goes to visit the I think it's the Waltham Watch factory, and he sees the future of American production there, and the interchangeability of components and all this kind of thing. And he sees the future there, and a future that very nearly destroys the Swiss watch industry in the late 19th century. But I mean, then you've got when you've got the Sterns taking over the business in the 30s, and you've got Jean Pfister coming in as that sort of, you know, amazing technical director. And I was fortunate enough to interview some of the really old timers some of them started there in the 40s when I was writing the book. I mean, it was a great thing to be able to do. And the period of the Champion Regular, where they went and they won the timing competitions, I think every period has something rewarding. You can do these books either basically just tabulating information, or you can use the information to tell a story that I feel is expository, but also explains more than merely this relaying the facts, if that makes sense. And then, of course, we had a massive technical appendix, which Michael Tay actually went to the trouble of reading, and thereby discovered, I think it was a 1518 that was hitherto unknown to
the 1518p. Yes.
Yay! I mean, I didn't know that because I didn't read the technical appendix. You know, I didn't go through it with a sort of. But the great thing is that that's the world where somebody will go through that appendix line by line. I mean, I was just happy that the experts, you know, I said, like, I really feel that this book should have proper technical information, technical appendices for the collector, so that it is. Even the person who says dismissively, I know all the stuff, will find a reason, a value in having that book. And I mean, if you look at Michael Tay, who's one of the foremost experts in the world, you know, he found literally a jewel in the small print. You know what I mean? So when I do a book like that, and there's not many books I've done of that depth, I want a book that, first of all, I would like to read myself, but then also one that I would like to refer to myself. And if I feel that I have done that, if I can interest myself, I stand a decent chance of interesting other people.
There's only one major problem with your book.
What's that?
No one can find it.
There's a new edition coming out.
Great news. When?
Soon, I believe. I mean, I think even this year.
Excellent.
I mean, I was in Geneva and I was shown what I was told was an early copy of it. And it's got a new final chapter. So it takes in things like the amazing only watch result of 2019, for example.
The 6300. That was exciting.
Yeah, well, you and I were there, and then we had that picture, and then we became part of a Bernie Sanders meme. Do you remember?
That's true, with Alan Banbury.
With Alan Banbury, you, me, Thierry, and then the unsuccessful Democratic presidential runner.
Oh, that was such a fantastic night. I mean,
that was a really historic moment.
a celebration of all that's good. And what Luke Pedavino has done with Only Watch just captures the hearts and minds. And
it really does, doesn't it?
It's what this industry is all about at the end of the day. I look forward to the next Only Watch.
Well, it's what, year after next, isn't it?
Yep. One more year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Patek clock was fantastic. And I think whoever got that actually did get a bit of a bargain.
I agree. I was anticipating it'd bring much more. And
I wasn't anticipating much more because that in 5 to 10 years, the market would have caught up. I think whoever bought that was very far-sighted and really did get something that is a genuine museum piece.
Truly. I'm very bullish, as you know, on Patek Philippe clocks. And I think history will treat that clock well. If it ever shows up at auction, like you said, in 10, 15 years, I think it'll bring more than wristwatches from the era.
Well, there's that very interesting, I forget who it is. It might have been the Time Museum chap. I don't know. But there was a picture of a man who was he was an American collector with proudly having 4 exquisite pocket watches in front of him on the table. And on his wrist was his daily beater, which is a 2499, I think, 3rd series. And the terrible thing is now, but the thing now is that the watch on his wrist that he regarded as a timepiece is probably worth more than those 4 pocket watches that he was so proud of.
Nick, what Patek Philippe watch are you wearing today?
It's one that you sold me.
The 5960?
Indeed it is.
On a bracelet.
I mean, I regard that watch as a fascinating watch. And I think for some years it was not misunderstood, but I think it was ahead of its time in that it's the first of a modern. I mean, my favorite all time would be the 5970 of that. I mean, it's a masterpiece. But this watch is, for me, a modern wearable version of the classic chronograph perpetual calendar combo, in that it's an annual calendar without the moon phase, and you've got this bullseye chrono at the bottom, and it's fly back and all that. So you're getting a Patek view of the world, but in a kind of parallel, younger or more contemporary or whatever. I mean, I think it's a fascinating, and the movement is great. I mean, it's very interesting on all sorts of levels, this watch. And I mean, I mean, it's a beautiful looking watch, and it's really grown on me. But I wanted to have one, first of all, because at the time they were affordable, but you could see the direction they were going in. This was some years ago now. And also because I think it is, in terms of the history of Patek, a significant model.
With Patek Philippe's complex relationship with steel, seeing a 5960 made in a steel case with the 5960 line 1A was surprising.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's also the kind of bracelet. It's a great bracelet. I mean, this is one of the things that I find Patek doesn't do enough of, for my taste anymore, is those great bracelets. I mean, the Neptune bracelet is a masterpiece. And I mean, there's those bracelets, those variations on. I mean, Atelier Réuni used to do some amazing stuff. I mean, they still do beautiful bracelets, but I'd like to see more, but there probably just isn't a market for that kind of thing.
It's a growing market, but it's a small market at this point. I'd like to bring to our listeners' attention something they may not know of, and that is the Patek Philippe owner's site. 6 years ago, Nick, you and I had the opportunity to film a video together in Philippe Stern's office at Plaine-l'Ouate on Patek Philippe limited editions. And you've since done many videos on your own on some very intriguing topics. I find at least here in the States, within the collecting community, not many people know about this the owner's site to watch these videos. So I encourage everyone to find it. If you're an owner of a Patek Philippe watch and a subscriber to the magazine, you get access to these incredible videos, and many with Nick sharing insightful thoughts on watches that you may or may not know about.
It is a great joy for me. I was filming one with Philip Barrett about patents only earlier this week. And there's a story I love about the Fortissimo minute repeater, because I was asking him, how do we calibrate the uptick in performance on a watch like this? Is it in decibels? No, decibels. So we took it down to the car park under PP6, which is a big old car park. they took a normal minute repeater and they took the fortissimo down there. The normal minute repeater could be heard at a distance of 10 meters, which is pretty good. The fortissimo could be heard at a distance of 80 meters.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, I haven't heard one yet. That's extraordinary.
It's pretty extraordinary. And the remarkable thing is it's louder on the wrist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an amazing piece of work. And what is interesting is it's not just that they're able to do this, because other makers that we know, other independents, other watchmakers can make one watch like that, could make 5 watches like that, could make maybe even 10 watches. But to actually have a watch like that enter the main collection and to be able to manufacture that as not in big quantities, but as a part of your offered collection is, this is what people don't always, in my opinion, always grasp about Patek, is they say, oh, so this brand does this complication. Yeah, this is entirely true, but Patek is not just known for its chronograph, it's known for men's sport, ladies' jewelry, men's simple, men's medium complications, men's grand complications, dress watches. It's active in all these sectors. In that sense, it's one of the last of the Mohicans, because other brands are notionally active in all sorts of sectors, but only really active in one, maybe. But Patek, I think, legitimately can claim to be relevant both commercially and culturally across the board, And I think, again, that's at the same time as withdrawing the steel Nautilus, which needed a refresh because it was an old watch. It's a great watch. Look at the bracelet, for example. It's not a modern watch bracelet. So, I think any manufacturer worth his salt will decide to make improvements that will, they won't alter the character of the watch, but they will make that watch a more contemporary experience, which is what they did when they did the 5711, and they put the curved ears on it, and then they rounded the ends of the tips of the indices off to match the curvature of the case and this kind of thing. Subtle things that you wouldn't notice unless they're pointed out to you. But the accumulation of detail is not just detail. The detail is what actually is the result, It's that accumulation of things that you don't really know or notice that suddenly then you're left with something really amazing.
And these subtleties are what make their watches so timeless.
Yeah.
Even when a watch comes out for the first time, I might not appreciate it from Patek Philippe, but then I grow to love it. I think of the 5960 in platinum with that first dial design. At first, I was just shocked. I was like, what's this
I think we all were. I thought, I need to get my head around that, And I'm wearing one now. I'm not wearing the platinum one, but it's a design that I needed to be able to understand. And there's very few watches that age badly at Patek.
And whenever I see the new releases, which are now throughout the year, I try to stop and pause and not jump to my first impressions, because first you need to see the watch, not on a screen. Yeah. You need to try it on and then give it time to simmer. Some of them are just a home run, at least in my mind, from day one. But others sometimes take a decade until I truly understand them.
Your understanding of them matures and catches up with it, and also the familiarity helps. But I think also this year, for example, putting the Clou de Paris on the case wall, simple but effective. That was a very, very nice watch. And it's interesting that the preferred one was the plain time only, with that sort of camera case dial and that Clou de Paris work on the case wall. It's a very interesting watch, and it's a kind of gold dress watch alternative to the 5711. In that it's not equivalent or alternative at all, but you know what I mean. It's sort of, in its way, relevant, popular, attractive, carefully designed, and a rewarding thing to look at and to wear.
Very well said. I can't even follow up on that because your words were beautiful. But I am going to quote someone to wrap up this interview.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to quote you. This is an interview you did with the Oxford Blue, the university newspaper that many of us are familiar with. Here is the quote. "Curiosity has propelled me forward without any particular professional goal. I've never really thought of myself as having a career. I've just worked." End quote.
It's about right.
You agree with what you said?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I basically am quite selfish in that I work on what interests me, and that's quite lazy because I couldn't really work on something that didn't interest me because I'm too spoiled, really. I mean, I'm lucky enough to be able to find out about stuff I'm interested in, and, it's an immense privilege.
And with so many diverse interests, and of course, you look through life through Patek Philippe glasses often. But you really have an extraordinary career. We can't wait to see what's next because we know there's another surprise around every corner with you.
Well, I suppose that must be the case. I'll let you know in advance.
Are there any final thoughts you'd like to add before we wrap up for today?
Oh, I never have final thoughts, John. I'm always. I mean, if I could, I mean, they have to wrench books from my computer virtually because I would still be working on the authorized biography today had they not ripped it out of my hands and put it into print, because I can always see things that I could have improved upon. I mean, there's not enough about the King of Siam in the Patek book. I would have liked to have included a chapter on that activity and those watches. It almost pains me to look back and see what I missed. I try my best. I try to be thorough. I try to be engaging in what I do. You're standing on the shoulders of giants in as much as you're interpreting the work of great men and women. I look back and I think, God, I could have done that better, or I wish I'd put that in, or, and I mean, I'd never get anything done if the publishers didn't kind of wrench it off me and sort of virtually have to come around with a stick and kind of threaten me until I handed it over,
Well, we can't wait to see the next edition of the book, in particular, your updates in covering the most recent years in Patek Philippe's history. And it's a story that's going to continue to be told for many, many decades ahead.
Well, let's hope. And thank you, John, for taking such an interest in what I do. I'm really touched.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll speak soon.
This was the 19th episode in our Collectability podcast series. Thank you all for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe, and remember to follow us on any podcast platform you enjoy listening to in order not to miss any future recordings. Thank you so much for listening. This is John Reardon for Collectability.